Salt, a kind of tiny and ordinary crystal, is stored on the earth in various forms. The seemingly insignificant salt is actually an important resource for human survival. Since the beginning of human civilization, the history of salt has been intertwined and entangled with it, penetrating with the narratives about the evolution of human civilization, economy, and politics. Its intertwined context shines in Chinese history. Under the semantic background of different eras, the scope of the concept of salt is no longer limited to satisfying basic physiological needs, but in every important part in the construction of human civilization, salt has been either actively or passively leaving a deep mark unconsciously on mankind's primitive desires for centralization, freedom, expansion, and mysticism. Chapter 1. Centralization of power. In Xia dynasty, the economic system in which the ruling class held the monopoly and franchise already began to appear in China. In ancient times, salt, a kind of commodity that has certain geographical differences and has a negligible impact on people's production and life, was also a very important strategic material. The huge profits of the industry and the central government's demand for maintaining stability and centralized governance have gradually evolved the economic system of salt monopoly into a taxation policy with a unique political character. The theory of official possession of natural resources, proposed by Guanjung of the Qi state during the spring and autumn period, is the first prototype of China's salt monopoly policy, which lasted over 2,000 years. In the ancient Chinese society of small peasant economy, where the centralization of power had long dominated, the ruling thought, kings have long arms, also provided a solid and stable ideological foundation for the policy of official possession of natural resources. The earlier policy of official possession of natural resources did not adopt a state-owned, but a monopoly policy. The government opened salt ponds to allow free private production, while the state unified purchases to control the output and price in the market, and in strict compliance with the household registration system, sold salt by household size, and a price including tax. Under the premise of avoiding rebellions caused by excessive taxes and levies, the centralized government accumulated wealth quickly, firmly controlling iron ores reserved in the mountains, and salt contained in the sea, the two important resources related to people's livelihood. It is this kind of powerful control that constituted the most loyal crowd of the peasant class to centralized rule. The regions favored by the salt-related policies had gradually formed a folk belief with regional characteristics, in the process of continuous development, based on the factors such as geographical environment, productivity level, and economic situation. It collides and interacts with the folk custom, producing more cultural connotations. Wukenwell in Zhejiang County, Sichuan Province has a long history of salt production, dating back to 221 BC. The temple of salt god enshrined by the common people looks more like a center of the salt production area, in the heart of the salt gathering place tightly wrapped by farmhouses. The temple of salt god closely linked the bureaucracy with the salt laborers. On the east and south courtyards on both sides of the main hall of the temple, the upper gable is carved with two sharp blades representing the imperial sword. These two sharp blades hang high above the head of everyone, always reminding people favored by the salt industry of being cautious with their words and deeds. As a symbol of centralized power, the incarnation of the emperor, and a powerful tool for important ministers, the blade became the visual carrier of the state's violent machinery. Chapter 2. Freedom. Ancient Chinese government monopolistically purchased the salt from salt manufacturers in a centralized manner at a low price, and then sold it to the salt dealers at a higher price, making enough money in the production and transportation sections to solve the financial deficit of the Empire's treasury, and detailed sales section was formulated by the salt dealers. However, the salt price was constantly raised after the salt dealers were disengaged from the uniform administration of the government. The masses' inability to pay the official salt price has ended the development of the illegal salt industry. Illegal salt gradually threatened and undermined the position of the official salt market at a lower price. No one threw concerns on the official salt, causing the decrease of government tax. For purpose of maintaining the stability of fiscal revenue, the government had to increase the price of salt and tighten the suppression of the illegal salt operations. The conflicts between officials and civilians were aroused during the course until being irreconcilable. For example, Huang Xianji and Huangchao, salt dealers, recruited outlaws everywhere in the course of selling illegal salt, and organizing armed forces during the prosperous reign of the Tang dynasty to transport illegal salt. In order to make up for financial deficit caused by the war after the Lashan rebellion, the salt official management system was re-enabled. The government struck a severe blow on the private salt market, and private merchants and farmers were forced to rise in revolt under oppression. The power united by salt dealers was non-ignorable. By relying on affluent family properties, and grasping strategic resources with centralization characteristics, monopolized by the government and armed escort force in the process of illegal salt transportation, the salt dealer class was powered with the courage to break the class barrier, and ability to rebel. Particularly, the troops led by Huang Chao even hit 6,000 people within just a few years, and finally occupied Chang'an. The force divided by salt resources dealt a heavy blow to the rule in the Tang dynasty. Salt tax, as a financial mainstay of national tax, lasted for more than 2,000 years, and still accounted for 5.49% of Chinese total tax even in the early days of the founding of the People's Republic of China in 1950. However, the salt tax accounted for less than 10% of China's total tax revenue till the early 1990s with the fast-evolving development of economy and society. The significant change in the data implies that modern China didn't take salt tax as an important financial mainstay of the country anymore, and the significance of state salt monopoly policy in contemporary China had gradually become a continual application of historical policy, and the elimination of monopoly mechanism. It is the first time of China's formal accession to WTO and a milestone in the process of China's opening up, and international economic globalization in 2001. The process of globalization of economy and trade made the international trade competition become increasingly crueler, and the boycott of anti-dumping measures recognized by the West, and non-market economy status, have emerged as issues imperative to be solved in China. The salt industry has become a major part of economic market reform. A new salt reform policy had been issued since 2001. The price control of the salt industry was gradually lifted after 7 long rounds of reform. Salt manufacturers were allowed to enter the sales field, and wholesalers were allowed to operate across regions. The salt brands in the region will become increasingly abundant when the competition on the market is moderately liberalized, making the salt companies, that have been in the monopoly system for a long time, can no longer rely on the government's plan to survive. And the existing situation of the salt market may be reshuffled. Whereas, it is clearly stipulated in the salt reform plan that new salt production manufacturers and wholesalers on the market will not be approved, and the number of businesses participating in the competition on the market will remain to be relatively fixed, and will be reduced without increase only. This means that there are limits in this round of market-oriented reform. The reshuffled and reorganized previously and newly founded businesses without fresh competitiveness are allowed to participate in competition. The market-oriented reform of China's salt industry in the past 2 decades plausibly seems to have stepped into the freedom, but it is actually a supply-side structural reform on the previous salt monopoly system. Chapter 3. Expansion. The characteristics involve that the salt is of high permeability and most microorganisms cannot survive in a high salt environment, enable the salt to become one of the most old-line, practical and extensive methods to preserve food in the world. Vegetables, meat, fish, milk and similar foods, unlike grains, are not supported to be stored for a long time, while salted vegetables, preserved meat, salted fish, cheese and other similar products are supported to be stored for months or even years. Pickled and portable foods with long quality life allow the human society to be likely to expand outward. The development of food consumption enabled the people living in the inland region to have the opportunity to eat salted fish, and people in coastal regions to stand a chance to taste cheese. Merchants connected abundant isolated social systems through the exchange of salt. Complex logistics and data exchange network were inadvertently set up in the process of long-distance trade and transportation. Trade exchange network was greatly effective in promoting the boom of industry and commerce, and the industry and commerce delivered promotion effects in terms of social progress significantly higher than those of the single agricultural economy. The trade exchange network was greatly effective in facilitating the prosperity of industry and commerce, and the driving forces of industry and commerce and social progress were much higher than those of the single agricultural economy. Human civilizations scattered all over the earth gathered at the crossroads of history. In the 15th century, the age of discovery began to develop with the disintegration of isolation between the East and the West. Traditionally regional maritime trade evolved into the world market-oriented global trade. The East and the West entered a completely new era of mutual understanding, and the conflicts and confluences of civilizations penetrated into all spaces of the world. He ever saw 7 consecutive large-scale ocean voyages in the early Ming dynasty, which was believed to be the greatest ocean voyage project in the world to exchange goods in the manner of award and tribute while showing China's strong strength, unpublicized prestige and virtue by demonstrating China's powerful wealth, making all countries stand in awe of the prestige and virtue of the Ming dynasty, and securing successful voyage of China's maritime trade. China implemented their diplomatic relations under the traditionally tributary trade system, and set up an ambition to establish a new order of international relations concentrated on themselves. Up to now, the first thorium molten salt reactor, TMSR, with the 4th generation nuclear energy technology within global scope was tested in Gansu, China in September 2021. Compared with the traditional reactors in which uranium is used for fission, the thorium with richer reserves, stable reaction and better performance is used in the 4th generation reactor to serve as the reactor fuel, and supersedes the traditional light water reactor cooling system, and molten salt reactor with less risk, higher chemical stability and lower pollution is employed. China will set up a larger scale thorium reactor, and put its technology into real commercial use, after being proven in the test. It is of great strategic significance for China's energy safety issue to realize energy autonomy in case of global energy shortage. China is expected to achieve commercial operation of the 4th generation nuclear reactor in 2035. Numerous green and clean energy technologies, epitomes of TMSR, become bridges to boost the interoperability between countries in the diplomatic policy of the Belt and Road Initiative, which will be advanced to global soft power of Chinese language to drive economic globalization, and reshape global economic structure, thereby touching the nerves of traditional continental empires, and current maritime hegemony countries. Chapter 4. Oriental Mysticism. With the alternation of dynasties, how to keep consolidating the authority of the ruling class became a subject that the monarchs of all the dynasties had to study. Hardline violent means to maintain social stability under the imperial power would eventually depend on a certain fluke. The formation of muscle memory of obedience at the ideological level of the people was the only way to maintain stability once and for all, and Oriental mysticism was then born in the hotbed of centralized power. Alchemy became the occult sciences trusted by the monarch in the court. Alchemy comes from the simple methodology, UAW, hat you eat, believed by ancient Chinese. Alchemists believed that because the growth cycle of grains is short, the lifespan of the people who consume grains would not be long, and to pursue longevity, one needs to find naturally generated and immortal minerals and metals in nature for no nourishment. As salt is the first of the 5 flavors, and also, in the ancient society, where the level of science and technology and productivity was very backward, this most accessible mineral product for mankind became a permanent member among the raw materials of alchemy. Taking the Qin dynasty as an example, after Qin Shi Huang unified the 6 states, he thought the past titles, such as emperor, monarch, and king, were not enough to show his lofty status, and he was not content with being a ruler on earth. With the supremacy and authority given by heaven, he created the new title of the first emperor of Qin, to honor himself and demonstrate his status as the ruler of the entire world, in order to express his unprecedented aspirations. The inimitable ambitions of Qin Shi Huang could be evidently seen from his tireless exploration of mysticism, the deification of royal blood, and the persistent pursuit of immortality during his reign. Qin Shi Huang worshipped his ancestors using the method of offering sacrifices to the Emperor of Heaven. Such a method of deifying the blood of the royal family created more legitimacy for the political rule of the Qin Empire. The sacredness of religion was used to normalize the relationships between the emperor and ministers, elders and children on the level of ethics and legality in order to realize the political stability of hierarchical social management. At the same time, by taking elixir and various other alchemies, Qin Shi Huang firmly believed that he could strengthen his connection with heaven and prolong his life and rule. This seemingly accidental religious belief is actually an inevitable result of political symbolic significance, under a high degree of centralization. Compared with the fairy alchemy pursued by the imperial power class, the mysticism prevailing among the masses looked completely different. As a designated production area for a state monopoly industry, the development of the salt industry brought huge economic benefits to the local area. While the regional economic development of the entire Bashu area was promoted, the cultural development also emerged, gradually forming a belief in the salt god with unique regional characteristics. The temple of salt god in Wokan town is the only well-preserved temple dedicated to the salt god. The salt god Guanjung is enshrined in the center of the temple. Since he pioneered the writing and formulating of the corresponding NG laws and policies, the salt merchants, who profited from the government's franchise policies, regarded Guanjung as the salt god in order to pray for the everlasting development of the salt industry. Guan Yu, the saint of war, and Li Bing, the fire god, assist on both sides of the main pos. Aishan. The fire god blesses the output and reserve of salt. In the process of production, Guan Yu sets a good example for salt merchants in the sales process, reminding merchants to value righteousness and adhere to the principle of integrity. Commercial culture and the belief in the salt god are intertwined and influence each other, with the 3 saints enshrined at the same time, which is just a smart integration of religious blessing, enlightenment and practical functions. In such folk belief, the images of faith carefully created by the imperial court, the authoritative power center, can be seen everywhere. When the image of the god of nature was born among the people, the government used it and injected a certain political ideology into it. The Guanjung became a salt god, and the imperial sword became a treasure from heaven. When the imperial power was mixed with heavenly justice, people no longer had the ability to distinguish